The gavel slammed down like a judge's verdict, echoing through the community center as Margaret Whitmore's voice cut through the silence. Your property will be seized within 72 hours. But as David Chen slowly reached into his briefcase, pulling out a manila folder that made her face drain of color, he whispered the words that would shatter her world. Actually, Margaret, I think you'll find I already own your house. The room erupted, but nothing could prepare them for what came next, because sometimes karma doesn't just knock, it demolishes the entire door. The certified letter arrived on a Tuesday morning, its edges sharp enough to cut through David Chen's carefully constructed piece. He stood in his kitchen, steam rising from his untouched coffee, reading the same 3 words over and over: immediate compliance required. The Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association, under the iron-fisted leadership of Margaret Whitmore, was demanding $15,000 in alleged violations: unauthorized garden modifications, unapproved exterior paint color a shade of blue that was apparently not within the approved palette, window boxes that violated the aesthetic harmony guidelines. David's hands trembled slightly as he read the final line: failure to comply within 72 hours will result in property lien and potential foreclosure proceedings. 15 years. 15 years he'd lived in this house, raised his daughter Sarah. Here, after his wife's death, maintained every inch of it with meticulous care. The garden that Margaret now deemed unauthorized was the same one his late wife Elena had planted. The one Sarah had helped tend every summer since she was 7. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. Dad, Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker, calling from her college dorm 3 states away. I just got your text. What's happening? It's nothing, sweetheart, just some HOA nonsense. Dad, you said they're trying to take the house? That's not nothing. David walked to the kitchen window, looking out at Elena's garden. The morning sun caught the blue hydrangeas she'd planted, the same blue that now threatened to cost him everything. It's complicated. Then, uncomplicate it. What aren't you telling me? He'd never been able to lie to Sarah, not even when she was little and asked why Mommy wasn't coming home from the hospital. Margaret Whitmore has been targeting me for months. Ever since I opposed her proposal to tear down the community playground, the playground where Mom used to take me, the same one. His voice hardened. She wanted to replace it with additional parking for her book club meetings. Sarah's sharp intake of breath carried across the miles. And now she's coming after our house. She's claiming violations that don't exist. Sarah. The paint color has been the same for 8 years. The garden predates the current HOA guidelines by a decade. But she's got the board in her pocket and apparently the law on her side. There has to be something we can do. David closed his eyes, remembering the emergency HOA meeting from 3 days ago. Margaret's voice, sharp and unyielding, cutting through every attempted defense. The board members nodding like trained seals, never once questioning her authority. The neighbors avoiding eye contact, afraid to speak up against the woman who controlled their community with spreadsheets and citations. I've called 3 lawyers, he said finally. They all say the same thing. Fighting this could take years and cost more than the house is worth. Even if we win, the legal fees alone would bankrupt us. So what? We just give up? We let her steal? The home where Mom The word came out sharper than he intended. Don't think I'm giving up. I need time to think. But thinking was a luxury he didn't have. Even now, he could see Margaret's pristine white sedan pulling into her driveway across the street. She emerged like a general surveying conquered territory. Her gray hair pulled into a bun so tight it seemed to stretch her face into a permanent scowl. Her clipboard, that damned clipboard, was already in her hands. She spotted him through the window and smiled. It wasn't a pleasant expression. David's doorbell rang 15 minutes later. Margaret. He opened the door but didn't invite her. In David, she clutched her clipboard like a shield. I trust you received our correspondence. Your ultimatum, you mean? Our legally binding notice of violation? Her voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd been planning this moment for months. I do hope you understand the gravity of the situation. I understand that you're abusing your position to settle a personal grudge. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Personal. David, this is about maintaining community standards. When homeowners like you flagrantly disregard the rules that keep our property values high, you hurt everyone. The rules you wrote. The rules you selectively enforce. I didn't write the covenants, David. I simply ensure they're followed. She glanced at her clipboard. Now, regarding the violations, the exterior paint has been the same color for 8 years, is heritage blue, which was removed from the approved palette in the 2019 revision. The garden modifications were here before you moved to this neighborhood, require architectural committee approval, which was never obtained. And the window boxes are identical to half the houses on this street. Margaret's smile widened. Those homeowners have retroactive approval. You, unfortunately, have been less cooperative with the association. The weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't about rules or community standards. This was punishment. Punishment for speaking up at meetings. Punishment for questioning her authority. Punishment for refusing to be another silent neighbor in her kingdom of perfectly manicured lawns and HOA-approved paint colors. You can't do this, he said quietly. I already have. She consulted her clipboard again. You have until Friday at 5 p.m. to bring your property into compliance. That means repainting the entire exterior, removing all unauthorized plantings, and eliminating the window boxes. The estimated cost, according to our approved contractors, is $15,000, and if I can't pay, then the association will file a lien against your property. If that lien remains unpaid for 30 days, we can proceed with foreclosure. Her voice carried no emotion, no acknowledgement that she was discussing the destruction of a man's life. It's all perfectly legal, David. I've checked. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and David, I'd start packing if I were you. Properties in foreclosure rarely sell for enough to cover the debts. You'll likely walk away with nothing. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a coffin lid. David stood in his empty house, surrounded by 15 years of memories, and felt something crack inside his chest. Not break, not yet, but crack. Like ice on a pond just before it gives way entirely. He walked to his study, to the old oak desk Alina had bought him for their 10th anniversary. In the bottom drawer, beneath years of tax returns and insurance policies, was a manila folder he hadn't opened in over a decade. His hands shook as he pulled it out. As he opened it for the first time since Elena's funeral, the documents inside were yellowed with age, but the words were still clear. Clear enough to change everything. Clear enough to destroy Margaret Whitmore's perfect little world. David Chen smiled for the first time in months, and it was not a pleasant expression. The documents spread across David's desk like pieces of a puzzle he'd forgotten how to solve. Property deeds, bank statements, corporation filings, all bearing Elena's neat signature and dates from before their marriage. Before he'd known about her family's real estate empire, before cancer had stolen her voice, before she could explain what she'd been planning, his phone buzzed. Sarah, texting from her dorm. Dad, I've been thinking, what if we crowdfund the money? My friends would help. David's heart clenched. His 20-year-old daughter, offering to beg strangers for money to save their home. He typed back, Don't worry about it, sweetheart. I may have found another solution. What kind of solution? David stared at the document in his hands. A corporate filing dated 18 years ago. Alina Chen listed as sole proprietor of Willowbrook Development, LLC, the same company that had originally developed their entire neighborhood. The kind your mother would have been proud of. He picked up another document. A property deed filed just months before Elena's diagnosis. Margaret Whitmore's address clear as day, with Elena's company listed as the mortgage holder. The pieces began clicking together like bullets sliding into a chamber. Elena hadn't just been a teacher, as he'd always believed. She'd been quietly building a real estate portfolio, buying up properties throughout their neighborhood, holding mortgages on dozens of homes, including Margaret's. David's hands trembled as he reached for his laptop, typing Margaret's address into the county records database. The mortgage information populated instantly. $340,000 remaining balance. Held by Willowbrook Development, LLC. Payment history showed monthly installments, never late, never missed. But according to Elena's files, something had changed 6 months ago. His phone rang, jolting him from his research. Mr. Chen. This is Patricia Morris from Blackstone and Associates. The voice was crisp, professional. I handled your wife's estate planning. I've been trying to reach you for several months regarding some outstanding business matters. David's throat went dry. I thought everything was settled years ago. The personal estate, yes. But Mrs. Chen had some separate business interests that were maintained in trust. I have strict instructions to contact you only if certain conditions were met. What conditions? If anyone attempted to foreclose on your primary residence, the world seemed to tilt sideways. How could you possibly know? Mrs. Chen was very thorough. Mr. Chen, she anticipated many scenarios. Are you available to meet this afternoon? 2 hours later, David sat in Patricia Morris's downtown office, feeling like Alice tumbling down the rabbit hole. The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman in her 50s, spread documents across her conference table with the precision of a card-sharp dealing poker. Your wife was a remarkable woman, Patricia said. She built a real estate empire while working full-time as a teacher, all without you knowing. She said she wanted to surprise you on your 20th anniversary. She died 3 months before our 20th anniversary. I know. I'm sorry. Patricia's voice softened momentarily, but she left very specific instructions. If anyone ever threatened your home, I was to activate what she called the nuclear option. She handed him a thick folder. Alina owns 60% of the mortgages in Willowbrook Estates, including Margaret Whitmore's. David's vision blurred. 60%. She bought them up over 15 years, usually when homeowners were in distress. Instead of foreclosing, she restructured the loans with better terms. Most of your neighbors have no idea who actually holds their mortgages. The payments go through a management company. But Margaret's payment history shows current through last month. Yes, but there's a problem. Patricia pulled out another document. Mrs. Whitmore took out a second mortgage 6 months ago. $50,000. Against her home equity. She's been using that money to fund what she calls community improvements, essentially paying contractors to cite violations throughout the neighborhood. David's blood chilled. She's been manufacturing violations to drive property values down so she can ... force sales. Yes, buy properties at below market prices through shell companies, then flip them. Very profitable and technically legal, as long as the HOA violations are legitimate. But she's targeting people she doesn't like, including the widow of the woman who holds her mortgage. Patricia's smile was sharp as a blade. Alina left. Specific instructions about Mrs. Whitmore. Apparently they had ... history. The room spun. History. Margaret Whitmore was the principal at Riverside Elementary when Alina taught there. She made Alina's life miserable for 3 years. Questioned. Her teaching methods denied her tenure, eventually forced her to transfer schools. Alina never forgot. David remembered those difficult years. Alina coming home exhausted and frustrated, talking about a vindictive principal who seemed determined to destroy her career. He'd never connected that woman to their neighbor. So when Margaret moved into Willowbrook Estates 12 years ago, Patricia continued, Alina made sure to acquire her mortgage. She's been waiting for what? Patricia handed him a final document for Margaret to break the terms of her loan agreement, which she did 6 months ago when she took out that second mortgage without notifying the primary lender. Clear violation of her contract with Willowbrook Development. David stared at the papers, the implications hitting him like a freight train. You're saying I can ... call her loan immediately? All $340,000, plus the $50,000 second mortgage, plus penalties for contract violation. Total amount due. $438,000, payable within 30 days or the property reverts to Willowbrook Development, which I now own. Which you now own. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Alina also left instructions for several other properties in your neighborhood. Turns out, most of the current HOA board members are behind on their mortgages to companies. Alina controlled. Funny how power-hungry people often have the worst personal finances. David's phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Reminder, 48 hours remaining for compliance. Start packing. He looked up at Patricia. What do I need to do? Sign here? She pushed a power of attorney form across the table. I'll handle the rest. By tomorrow morning, Mrs. Whitmore will receive her own certified letter. And then, Patricia's smile could have cut glass. Then we find out how well Margaret Whitmore handles being on the receiving end of an ultimatum. David signed the document with Alina's old fountain pen, the one she'd used to grade papers every night for 20 years. As his signature dried on the page, he felt something shift inside him. Not just relief, justice, the kind Alina would have orchestrated herself if cancer hadn't stolen her time. He stood to leave, then turned back. Patricia, there's one more thing. Margaret mentioned that the HOA can foreclose on my property for unpaid violations. About that, Patricia's eyes gleamed. I've been reviewing the HOA charter. Very interesting document. Did you know that any homeowner who holds mortgages on more than 50% of the properties in a development automatically becomes the majority stakeholder in the homeowners association? David's heart began to race, meaning you don't just own Margaret's house, Mr. Chen. As of today, you own the HOA. The drive home passed in a blur. David pulled into his driveway just as Margaret emerged from her house, clipboard in hand, striding across the street with the confidence of someone who believed she held all the cards. David, she called out, her voice sing-song with false sweetness. I wanted to remind you about tomorrow's deadline. I've taken the liberty of arranging for a moving truck to be available Friday afternoon. I know how difficult these transitions can be. David got out of his car slowly, deliberately. In his briefcase was the power of attorney, signed and notarized. In his pocket was his phone. Patricia Morris on speed dial. That's very thoughtful of you, Margaret. I've also prepared a list of apartments in your price range. Most allow pets, in case you want to get a cat. I hear single men your age often find companionship with cats. The cruelty in her voice, the casual way she discussed his displacement, crystallized every ounce of rage he'd been suppressing. But instead of anger, David felt something else. Anticipation. Actually, Margaret, I think there might be a misunderstanding about who's moving. Her smile faltered slightly. I'm not sure what you mean. David pulled out his phone and speed-dialed Patricia. Patricia. Yes, it's David. Please proceed with the documentation we discussed. Yes, immediately. He hung up and looked at Margaret, whose face had gone pale. You see, Margaret, I've just learned some very interesting things about property ownership in our neighborhood. Things my late wife arranged before she died. Things that are about to change everything. Margaret's clipboard slipped from her hands, scattering papers across the driveway. I don't know what game you think you're playing, David, but it's not a game. His voice was quiet, deadly calm. Check your mailbox tomorrow morning. You'll find it's your turn to receive a certified letter. He walked toward his house, then paused at the door. Oh, and Margaret, you might want to start packing. Margaret Whitmore hadn't slept in 36 hours. The certified letter lay open on her kitchen table like a death warrant. Its legal terminology swimming before her bloodshot eyes. Notice of loan default, immediate payment required. $438,000, due within 30 days. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, dialing her lawyer for the 5th time since dawn. Richard, it's Margaret again. Please, you have to call me back. They can't do this. There has to be something. The line went dead. Even her lawyer was avoiding her calls. Across the street, David Chen's house sat peaceful in the morning light. Elena's blue hydrangeas swaying in the breeze. The same blue that had started this war. The same blue that was now about to end it. Margaret's doorbell rang at exactly 9 a.m. She opened it to find a process server, a thin man with kind eyes and an apologetic smile. Margaret Whitmore. Yes, these are for you. He handed her a thick envelope. Have a good day, ma'am. Margaret tore open the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside were documents that made her blood freeze. HOA board dissolution papers, signed by the majority stakeholder. Effective immediately. Her phone buzzed with a text from board member Tom Harrison. Did you see the notice? Emergency meeting at community center now. Margaret drove to the community center in a daze, her perfect world crumbling around her like a house of cards in a hurricane. The parking lot was already full, every HOA board member, plus dozens of homeowners she'd cited over the years. Inside, Tom Harrison stood at the front of the room, his face pale and drawn. Beside him sat Patricia Morris, David's lawyer, with a stack of documents that looked thick enough to choke a horse. Where's David? Margaret demanded as she entered. He'll be here shortly, Patricia replied calmly. He's handling some business at the bank. Margaret's stomach dropped. What business? Foreclosure proceedings? Several of them, actually. The room erupted in concerned murmurs. Margaret pushed through the crowd, her voice rising to a shriek. You can't do this. I've given 15 years of my life to this community. 15 years of tyranny, came a voice from the back. Mrs. Chen, David's elderly neighbor, stepped forward. Margaret had cited her twice for having the wrong shade of shutters. 15 years of bullying decent people. I maintained property. Values. Margaret's voice cracked. I kept this neighborhood. You kept it under your thumb, interrupted Jake Morrison, a young father she'd fined for having a vegetable garden. My kids couldn't even play in their own yard without you measuring the grass height. More voices joined in, stories of harassment, excessive fines, selective enforcement. Margaret looked around the room and realized something that hit her like a physical blow. They hated her. Every single person in this room genuinely hated her. Ladies and gentlemen, Patricia's voice cut through the chaos. If I could have your attention, the room fell silent. As of this morning, the Willowbrook Estates Homeowners Association has been dissolved. The new property management company, Willowbrook Development LLC, will be taking over all community oversight. What does that mean for our mortgages? Called out Sandra Williams, panic in her voice. For most of you, nothing changes. Your payment schedules remain the same. However, several board members have violated their loan agreements through what we've discovered was systematic mortgage fraud. Margaret's knees went weak. Mortgage fraud. Patricia consulted her notes. Using HOA positions to manipulate property values for personal gain, accepting kickbacks from contractors for fabricated violations, misappropriating HOA funds for personal use. She looked directly at Margaret. The FBI is very interested in your activities, Mrs. Whitmore. The room spun. Margaret grabbed the back of a chair to keep from falling. I was protecting. You were protecting your investment portfolio, Patricia continued. Shell companies purchasing foreclosed properties, contractor kickbacks for unnecessary work orders. We have documentation going back 3 years. This is insane. Margaret's voice rose to a scream. David Chen is nobody. He's a widower with a dead-end job who can't even maintain his own property. Actually, came a calm voice from the doorway. I think you'll find that's no longer accurate. David entered the community center, and Margaret barely recognized him. Gone was the defeated man she'd been tormenting for months. This David Chen wore a tailored suit and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who held all the cards. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "Margaret." He nodded politely, then addressed the room. "I want to thank everyone for coming. I know this is confusing, so let me explain what's happening." He moved to the front of the room with the easy authority of someone born to command. "My wife Elena spent 15 years quietly acquiring distressed mortgages in our neighborhood. Not to exploit anyone, but to protect them. She restructured loans, lowered interest rates, and prevented foreclosures." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the crowd. She also kept detailed records of HOA activities, including evidence of corruption and abuse of power. When she became ill, she made provisions to ensure this community would be protected. Protected? From what? Someone called out. David's eyes found Margaret's, from people who use positions of trust to hurt their neighbors. Margaret felt the walls closing in. "You can't prove anything." "Actually, we can." Patricia stood, opening her briefcase. "Bank records showing HOA funds transferred to your personal accounts. Contracts with inflated prices from contractors, who kicked back 20% to you personally. Email chains discussing which homeowners to target based on personal grudges rather than actual violations. That's not TI never. We also have testimony from 3 contractors who were willing to talk to the FBI in exchange for immunity. They're very chatty about the whole operation." Margaret's world tilted sideways. She grabbed David's arm, her voice desperate. "Please, David, we can work this out. I made mistakes, but I can fix this. I can make things right." David looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then gently removed it. "You had 15 years to make things right, Margaret. Instead, you chose to terrorize people who just wanted to live in peace. But where will I go? This is my home. You should have thought of that before you tried to steal mine." The community center doors opened again, and 2 FBI agents entered, their badges visible, their expressions professional and cold. Margaret Whitmore, the lead agent, a stern woman in her 40s, approached with handcuffs already in hand. "You're under arrest for mortgage fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud." Margaret's legs gave out. She collapsed into a chair, the weight of her actions finally crushing her. Around the room, her former victims watched in stunned silence as the woman who had terrorized them was read her rights. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. ... As the agents led Margaret away, she turned back to David one last time. "This isn't over." David's response was quiet, but everyone in the room heard it. "Yes, Margaret, it is." The community center emptied slowly, neighbors talking in hushed, amazed tones. David remained behind, standing alone in the space where Margaret had wielded her power like a weapon for so many years. Patricia approached him, her expression thoughtful. "How do you feel?" David considered the question. He thought about Elena, about the garden she'd planted, about Sarah calling from college, worried about losing her childhood home. He thought about justice, delayed but not denied. "Like I can finally breathe again." His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dad, whatever. You did. I'm proud of you. Mom would be too." David smiled, looking out the window at the neighborhood Elena had secretly protected for 15 years. Tomorrow, he would start the process of transferring the mortgages to a legitimate management company. The community would heal. Property values would recover. People would feel safe in their own homes again. But tonight, he would go home to Elena's garden, to the blue hydrangeas that had started this war, and he would tell her that justice had finally been served. Margaret Whitmore's reign of terror was over. The kingdom was free. 3 months later, David Chen stood in his backyard watching Sarah plant new flowers beside Elena's hydrangeas. His daughter had taken a semester off to help him navigate the transition, though they both knew she really just wanted to be home. For this moment, the first spring in their garden without the shadow of Margaret Whitmore's tyranny hanging over them. "Dad, look at this." Sarah held up a handwritten note she'd found, tucked beneath one of the loose stones bordering the flower bed. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded, but Elena's handwriting was unmistakable. "My darling David, if you're reading this, then Margaret finally pushed too far, and my little insurance policy has been activated. I'm sorry I couldn't tell you about the business. I wanted it to be a surprise for our anniversary. I'm sorry I couldn't be there to see her face when she realized who really owned her throne. But mostly, I'm sorry I won't be there to see you free. Take care of our garden. Take care of our Sarah. Take care of yourself. All my love, Elena. P.S. The blue hydrangeas were always my favorite. Don't let anyone tell you they're the wrong color." David's vision blurred as Sarah wrapped her arms around him. Even 3 years after her death, Elena was still protecting them. still fighting their battles, still making sure her family was safe. She knew, Sarah whispered. She knew Margaret would come after us eventually. Your mother was the smartest person I ever met, David replied, his voice thick with emotion. She saw patterns where other people saw coincidences. The sound of laughter drew their attention to the street, where a group of neighborhood children played hopscotch on the sidewalk. For the first time in years, kids were actually playing outside. Their parents no longer terrified of arbitrary citations for excessive noise or inappropriate recreational activities. David's phone buzzed with a text from Tom Harrison, the former HOA board member who now served as the neighborhood's volunteer coordinator. Community barbecue this weekend. Your famous burgers? David typed back. Wouldn't miss it. The transformation of Willowbrook Estates had been remarkable. Without Margaret's iron grip, the community had blossomed. Neighbors talked to each other again. Children played in yards. Without fear, Mrs. Chen had painted her shutters bright yellow, her favorite color, and no one had said a word except to compliment how cheerful they looked. The new management company, carefully vetted by Patricia Morris, had eliminated most of the arbitrary rules Margaret had imposed over the years. Paint colors were now suggestions rather than commandments. Garden varieties were celebrated rather than regulated. Window boxes were not just permitted but encouraged. Margaret herself had pleaded guilty to multiple federal charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. 5 years in minimum security prison, followed by 10 years probation. Her house, David's house now, had been sold to a young family with twins who turned the perfectly manicured lawn into a playground complete with swing set and sandbox. The irony wasn't lost on him that the woman who'd spent years obsessing over property values had caused hers to plummet through her criminal activities. The house had sold for 60% of its former value, barely covering the outstanding mortgage debt. Dad, Sarah's voice pulled him from his thoughts. What are you going to do with all this? She gestured vaguely, encompassing not just the house and garden, but the entire empire Alina had built. The property management business was thriving under professional oversight, generating enough income to secure David's retirement and Sarah's education while maintaining affordable mortgage rates for their neighbors. I've been thinking about that, David said. What would you say to the Alina Chen Community Foundation? Sarah's eyes lit up. Tell me more. Affordable housing initiatives. Down payment assistance for first-time homeowners. Maybe some educational scholarships for kids whose parents are teachers. He smiled. Your mother always said teachers didn't get paid enough to afford the communities they served. She'd love that. There's something else. David pulled a business card from his pocket. Patricia introduced me to a documentary filmmaker. She wants to tell the story how HOAs can be corrupted, how communities can fight back. She thinks it might help other neighborhoods dealing with similar situations. Sarah took the card, studying it thoughtfully. Margaret won't like having her story told. Margaret gave up the right to privacy when she chose to terrorize her neighbors for 15 years. David's voice was firm but not bitter. If our story helps even one person stand up to a bully, then everything we went through was worth it. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden, highlighting the contrast between Elena's carefully planned landscaping and the wild, joyful chaos that had grown up around it. David realized that was the perfect metaphor for their lives. Now Elena's careful foundation supporting something beautiful and uncontrolled and alive. His phone rang, displaying an unknown number. David Chen speaking. Mr. Chen, this is Detective Sarah Martinez with the Financial Crimes Unit. I wanted to let you know that we've recovered approximately $200,000 in assets that Mrs. Whitmore had hidden. As the primary victim, you're entitled to restitution. David nearly dropped the phone. $200,000. Money she embezzled from the HOA over the years, plus proceeds from her fraudulent contractor schemes. We've also identified 17 other HOA boards across 3 states that she was advising, all showing similar patterns of abuse. Your case has opened up a much larger investigation. After hanging up, David stared at his phone in amazement. Margaret's crimes had been even more extensive than anyone had realized. 17 other neighborhoods, 17 other communities, terrorized by the same playbook of manufactured violations and selective enforcement. Good news, Sarah asked. Justice has a way of multiplying, David replied. Your mother would say, that's the universe maintaining its balance. As evening approached, David and Sarah sat on the front porch, watching their neighbors emerge for evening walks and conversations. The Johnsons were teaching their grandson to ride a bike in their newly relaxed driveway. Mrs. Chen was watering her yellow shutters with obvious pride. Jake Morrison's children were playing an elaborate game involving chalk art on the sidewalk cart that would have earned them a citation under Margaret's reign. I have a confession, Sarah said suddenly. Oh, I always hated coming home from college because of her, because of Margaret. I was embarrassed by how she treated you, how she made you look weak." Sarah's voice was small, ashamed. "I'm sorry, Dad. I should have stood up to her too." David took his daughter's hand. "Sweetheart, you were a kid dealing with college and losing your mother and watching your father get pushed around by a bully. You have nothing to apologize for, but I should have trusted that you'd figure it out. I didn't figure it out. Your mother did, 15 years ago." He squeezed her hand. "But I'll tell you what I learned through all this. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is wait for the right moment to act. Margaret thought she was destroying me, but she was actually activating your mother's master plan." They sat in comfortable silence as the neighborhood settled into evening. Streetlights flickered on, illuminating sidewalks where children's chalk art told stories of freedom and joy. In windows throughout Willowbrook Estates, families gathered for dinner without fear, secure in their homes, protected by a woman they'd never met, but who had loved them enough to spend 15 years building their safety. Sarah's phone buzzed. With a text from her college roommate, "How's the evil HOA lady situation?" Sarah showed David the message, grinning. "What should I tell her?" David considered the question, thinking about Margaret in her prison cell, about the 17 other communities that would soon be free, about Elena's garden blooming in colors no HOA would ever again try to regulate. "Tell her the truth," he said finally. "Tell her that karma sometimes takes its time, but it never forgets an address." Sarah laughed, typing rapidly. Then she looked up at her father with Elena's eyes and Elena's smile. "Dad, yeah? I think Mom would be really proud of how this turned out." David looked across the street at the house where Margaret Whitmore had once plotted the destruction of their family. The new owners had painted it a cheerful green and planted sunflowers in the front yard. Children's toys scattered the lawn, like confetti, and a sign by the door read, "Welcome, friends." The kingdom wasn't just free, it was flourishing. "Yeah," David said, feeling Elena's presence in the evening breeze that rustled her blue hydrangeas. "I think she would be too." The HOA Karen's reign of terror was over. The community she'd tried to control with fear now thrived on trust. And somewhere in the evening air, in the laughter of children playing without fear, and the conversations of neighbors who no longer whispered, Elena Chen's legacy lived on not in the empire she'd built, but in the freedom she'd secured for the people she'd never met but had always protected. Justice, it turned out, was worth the wait.